Hey everyone, Trevor here with The Dark Room. So over the years, I've started many videos, blogs, and posts with exciting news for the film community. And typically, it has something to do with, well, film. Either previously discontinued film that's been brought back or newly developed film that's being introduced, all of which is really exciting. And obviously, we want to see more of that. But something we've also been hoping for and wanting are new film cameras. And that's because, well, most of the film cameras we shoot with are older. I mainly shoot with cameras from the 80s and the 90s. Many of you shoot with cameras much older than that. And those cameras are not going to last forever. So new cameras are really important. And while there are some new cameras currently being made, most of those cameras fall into two categories. Very expensive cameras that produce very good results but are out of most of our budgets, or very affordable cameras that are cheaply made and produce subpar results. So obviously, it'd be nice to have something in between. And as of today, June 17th, 2024, Pentax has done that with a Pentax 17. If you're like me, you've probably been following the Pentax social media on Instagram and YouTube, seeing all of the teasers and videos from TKO, which is really exciting. And about a week or so before I got this camera in hand, I learned that it was a half-frame camera and that it was zone focus. Those two things kind of worried me. They made me think that this camera might not be for me, but I can tell you this, and I'll show you this as well when it comes to image quality, that is not the case anymore. I really like this camera. As you will see from the images that I will be showing in this video, it's a very capable, very good camera. But before we get into that, let's talk about the layout, the design. So first off, it's a half-frame camera. Half frame is something that we develop and scan here at the Darkroom. It's 35 millimeter film that is only exposing half of the frame, meaning that you get double the frames per roll. So if you have a 36 exposure roll, you're gonna get 72 exposures, which is really nice. The only downfall of that is that you're getting half the resolution of a normal frame. And oftentimes, half-frame cameras have cheaper lenses, plastic lenses, or are older cameras that don't take as great of photos. But that is not the case with this camera. This camera has a lens from the Ricoh Auto Half with modern-day coatings that produce very good results. The lens is a 25 millimeter 3.5 lens, which is the equivalent of a 37 millimeter lens, which is right in the sweet spot of 35 and 40 millimeters. And I have found that I really like this focal length. The next thing that worried me is that it's zone focus. Zone focus is different than manual focus. Manual focus, when you're focusing on the lens, you're seeing feedback in the viewfinder showing if it's in focus or out of focus. But with zone focus, you're making an educated guess. So if you think something is 5.5 feet away, you set it to 5.5 feet, and then you take the photo. Now, there's some pros and cons of that. The cons is that you don't get the precise feedback. The pros is that it actually makes it pretty quick for candid photography, shooting from the hip, especially with street photography, which I'll get into when it comes to how I liked and enjoyed shooting with this camera. Next, I want to show you the layout of the camera. Starting on this side, you can see that you can manually select the ISO. And this is the only way to select the ISO. There's no DX code reader, meaning that you can shoot non-DX code film. The other thing that's really nice is a lot of point and shoot cameras won't allow you to change the ISO, meaning that you can't push or pull or do anything like that, but you can with this because you can manually select it, which I actually really like. Then right here, you can see that it has exposure compensation from -1 all the way up to +2. And then here you see all the shooting modes. There's an auto mode. The auto mode basically will pop the flash if you need it and won't if you don't need it. And then if you want the flash on, you can go into the flash modes, which are program, and the night mode, which goes up to 4 seconds. If you don't want the flash on, you go to the white right here, and this has program, night mode, bokeh, and bulb. Program is just normal auto program mode. Night mode, again, goes up to 4 seconds. Bokeh mode is going to shoot at its fastest aperture, which is a 3.5. 3.5 is not super fast, and with it being half frame, you're not going to have a lot of noticeable bokeh or shallow depth of field. But the closer you are to the subject, the more depth of field shallow depth of field you can have. And I got some with some pretty nice shallow depth of field with this camera. And then last but not least is the bulb mode. If you're going to be shooting with the bulb mode or the night mode, I recommend having a sturdy tripod. And since this camera doesn't have a self-timer, you're going to need the electronic cable release, which is right here. And then that will allow you to take the photo without any camera shake of pressing the shutter button. There's an on-off switch right here, and then the frame counter is right there. The camera takes a CR2 battery, which is really common. It's really cool that it has this right here. We slide the film rebate from the box into it. This is something that modern day film cameras from say the 90s don't really have, but it's kind of a cool touch. When I got this camera in hand, I was really surprised at how well built it was. It has a great grip. It's magnesium alloy on the bottom and the top, which is light but really rugged and tough. It is kind of plasticky through the back, but still feels really good, and it feels amazing in hand. It's very light, very compact. So when it comes to the actual shooting experience, I first got this camera right before a trip to Lake Michigan. Took it on a road trip, and I shot nonstop with it. I took photos of everything from the beach, from sunset to making coffee, to this tulip festival, walking around town. I just photographed everything. And I actually bracketed most of my shots from -1 to even to +1, just to see how good the meter is. And the meter is right there. It's not through the lens, but it is on the lens. As long as you have a filter that's not too big and doesn't block that with the thread, you could probably use filters. I used a UV filter, which I used basically just to protect that front element so I didn't get sand or water in there, and it worked just fine. And when it comes to zone focusing it, I was about halfway through my first roll when I just stopped thinking about zone focusing because it became secondhand nature. When I was outside, I kept it on infinity, and you can see that infinity is the mountain and macro goes all the way to the flower. And then also it shows that in meters as well as feet right here at the bottom of the lens. And you also see this through the viewfinder. So when you're looking through the viewfinder, which is vertical because it's half frame. So this right here is a vertical photo. This is horizontal, which is different than the 35mm camera. So when you're looking through the viewfinder, you will see that feedback of what focus distance you're focusing on. You'll also see 2 frames. The biggest frame is every distance other than macro, and the small frame is the macro frame. So when you're shooting anything other than macro, you just look through the main big frame, and then when you're shooting the macro frame, this is the distance of the macro length, which is just shy of a foot. So you put it up to what you're photographing, and then take your photo. And as you can hear, maybe, this is the shutter sound. It's really quiet. And since it's a zone focus camera, along with that quiet shutter, it can be really stealthy because zone focusing allows you to shoot from the hip really easily, which is a lot of what I did with this camera because, when I was taking photos of stuff that's on infinity, but then if I knew that my subject was at 10 feet, I just knew that that was 1 click over, or if it was 5.5 feet, another click, or 4 feet, another click. So I just would always put it to infinity. And then when I see what I want to photograph, I just knew how many clicks over. And then when I was indoors, I would shoot at 1.7, which is basically the distance, 1.7 feet, which is basically the distance of this camera from the camera I'm recording this with. So if, I was taking a photo of what I was eating, then I would take that photo. If I was taking a portrait of someone that's only 4 feet away, it was 1 click over, or multiple people that are around 5.5 feet, another click from there. So once I started doing that, I really got the hang of this camera and how it worked. And I was really surprised by the results. And zone focusing can be pretty forgiving depending on the light that you're shooting in. I was typically shooting in bright sunlight, meaning that the camera was shooting at around f8 or f11. So say you're focusing on infinity and you shoot it at 10 feet, it's probably still going to be in focus, and vice versa, because you're shooting at f8 or f11, which has a broad depth of field, making it much more forgiving. Also, this camera has a flash, which is right here, and there is flash indicators in the viewfinder. There is a light that blinks if there's not enough light, or if you have a lens cap on, or if your film is not advanced and you're trying to take photos. There's also a light that blinks if the flash is charging. And then once it is charged, then it stays steady, telling you that you are ready to take photos. And here's the flash right here. And you can actually see it in these two photos that I took while in New York City. I was walking through New York City, taking some candid photos, and I saw this guy with a umbrella. I set it to 10 feet because that's the distance that my subject was. And I shot from the hip at 10 feet, one with the flash and one without the flash. So you can see the difference between the two. And I felt like this camera really shined when it came to street photography because of the zone focus element. It just made it really easy to pre-focus and photograph people as they walked by, or as I was photographing landscapes or scenes that were far away. I didn't really have to think about focus. I just preset it and took it, because a lot of times with my autofocus cameras, sometimes they'll hunt for focus or miss focus, especially in low light when it comes to taking candids with a flash. A lot of my cameras will kind of hunt for focus, sometimes focus on the background, where this one I just had to select what I wanted and then take the photo, and I was good. And I took this photo of TKO, who is the designer of this camera, while he was explaining the inspiration for this camera. And I used the same technique. I just preset it, didn't need a flash because I had CineStill 800T in, and just took the photo and was pleasantly surprised by the photos. This camera takes great photos, and I have shot a lot of film through it, around 8 to 9 rolls. I've shot Pro Image 100, Gold 200, Color Plus 200, Portra 160, Portra 400, Ultramax 400, HP5 at 800, Tri-X, CineStill 800T, and T-Max P3200, which is currently getting developed, and I've gotten great results for all of them. And the meter on this camera is very good. Like I had mentioned, I bracketed a lot of my shots, and I ended up just choosing all of the evenly exposed photos for all of these, meaning that the meter is really accurate and really good, which is very important when it comes to half frame, because if you want the best scan from us, that means you want to give us the best exposure. The better the exposure, the better the focus, the better the lens, the better the scan we can give you. So if you have a really well exposed film, you're going to have a lot less noticeable grain. That's why a lot of these photos, just you can barely see the grain, which is really cool. But also, the grain is kind of a fun thing about this. I actually took a photo side by side with a Mamiya 7, which is a medium format camera, in this photo. And while the grain is less noticeable in the medium format photo, I actually like the photo better from the Pentax 17. Now, when talking to TKO about this camera, it was really fun to hear the design elements that went into this. It has a lot of history and design from prior cameras. So I'm going to go through that right now. One, it has the AOG logo, which you can see on the Pentax Spotmatic, as well as the Pentax Spotmatic Aero. It also says film camera on it, which I think is really funny because this is a modern day film camera made when digital cameras are being made. So you have to specify that's a film camera. Most film cameras don't say that it's a film camera, so I think that's kind of funny. And then the advanced knob right here is actually from a Pentax Auto 110, which I have right there. And then, like I said, the lens comes from a Ricoh Auto half. The font, the 17 right here, comes from the Pentax 6.7 font. And then the actual rewind knob comes from a Pentax LX. It was so great to meet the people that designed this. TKO is so nice, had so much passion into this design, and I'm really excited to see how the film community puts this camera to good use. They have said that this camera was designed with beginners in mind because of the vertical viewfinder. Most people are taking photos with iPhones, which are vertical. So a lot of people are used to that, which I kind of like. I like vertical photos. I don't have to move my hat to take photos with this compared to a lot of my other cameras that shoot vertical. I have to push up my hat. So I kind of like it. Works really well. And the fact that you have 72 frames gives you the grace and space to just test it out, to take a lot of photos and get to know the camera really well. I do think it actually would be good for a beginner. I know that zone focusing can be kind of intimidating, but honestly, manual exposure, in my opinion, is more intimidating than zone focus. Manual exposure can be harder to learn than just being like, I think that's 10 feet away, and then setting it to 10 feet. Most people have a good grasp on how far things are away, so all they have to do is make a good educated guess and then set that on the camera and you're good to go. I also think this camera will be great for experienced people. I thought that this camera was going to be more of a companion camera where I just bring this along with a 35 or medium format, but the results I got from this camera, honestly, are good enough to be a standalone, your only camera that you bring. But yeah, we're really excited for this camera. We look forward to seeing all of your results and would love to hear in the comments below what you think of this camera. If this is a camera that you will get for yourself and shoot with. And if you want to learn more and see higher resolution photos from this camera, be sure to check out the darkroom.com because we have a blog there with a lot more examples.